encircled by mountains and crossed by river valleys. The Bohemian Basin formed a natural political unit long before it became a kingdom. Long before dynasties ruled from Prague, the region's physical boundaries defined patterns of settlement, defense, and exchange. Geography imposed structure on human activity, creating both protection and constraint within the heart of Central Europe. The Bohemian Basin occupies a plateau encircled by distinct mountain ranges. The Sudetes to the northeast, the Ur Mountains to the northwest, and the Bohemian Forest along the southwest frontier. Geological surveys confirm that these uplands formed a near-continuous natural barrier by late antiquity. The basin's average elevation, combined with fertile lowlands along major rivers, made the region agriculturally sustainable while limiting large-scale external penetration. Archaeologists identify settlement continuity in river valleys dating to the 5th and 6th centuries CE, particularly along the Vltava and Elba systems. These river corridors provided arable soil and access to freshwater resources, enabling early agrarian communities to consolidate within defensible terrain. Records from late Roman geographers, including references in the writings of Ptolemy, describe the broader region as part of Central European tribal zones beyond direct imperial administration. Following the decline of Roman authority north of the Danube in the 5th century, population movements reshaped the basin. Germanic groups such as the Marcomanni had previously occupied parts of the region, but archaeological layers suggest demographic shifts during the migration period. Settlement evidence indicates a gradual transition rather than abrupt abandonment. Excavations near present-day Prague reveal continuity in agricultural tools, ceramics, and fortified hilltop structures, suggesting adaptation to new political realities rather than complete disruption. The basin's hydrological network structured internal cohesion. The Vltava River flows northward to join the Elbe, which continues toward Saxony and the North Sea basin. This riverine linkage connected Bohemia to emerging trade routes in early medieval Europe. Archaeologists uncovered imported goods, including Frankish metalwork and Bavarian ceramics, in 8th and 9th century contexts. Such findings indicate participation in regional exchange networks well before formal state structures emerged. River transport reduced logistical constraints, permitting movement of surplus grain, livestock, and raw materials. These routes later supported administrative centralization by allowing rulers to project authority along navigable corridors. Mountain passes simultaneously created controlled points of vulnerability. While the surrounding highlands offered protection, they also contained narrow corridors linking Bohemia to Bavaria, Saxony, and Moravia. Control of these passes became strategically significant. Fortified hill settlements, known as hradiska, appear in elevated positions overlooking transit routes. Archaeological surveys document defensive earthworks and wooden palisades dating to the 8th and 9th centuries. These fortifications indicate organized communal labor and coordinated defense strategies. Geography, therefore, did not eliminate conflict. Rather, it concentrated strategic focus on specific access points. Agricultural viability within the basin derived from loess soils deposited during earlier geological periods. Pollen analysis conducted in sediment cores demonstrates increasing cereal cultivation from the 6th century onward. This expansion corresponds with stable village settlement patterns identified through post-hole alignments and storage pits. According to archaeobotanical studies, barley, wheat, and millet dominated early cultivation. Livestock remains suggest mixed farming economies with cattle and pigs as primary sources of protein. The environmental capacity to sustain population growth reinforced territorial cohesion. Surplus production supported both local elites and specialized craftspeople, forming the economic substrate of later political authority. Mineral resources, though not yet fully exploited in the early period, were already present beneath the basin's surface. Geological mapping confirms significant silver-bearing deposits in the Kutna-Ora region. Although large-scale extraction developed in the late 13th century, earlier surface indications of metal resources likely contributed to regional awareness of mineral wealth. Archaeometallurgical analysis identifies small-scale iron production in several early medieval sites. Iron tools and weapons recovered from burial contexts demonstrate technological competence and localized resource utilization. Over time, Such resource availability would amplify the basin's economic and strategic significance. Climatic conditions during the early medieval period also influenced settlement stability. Paleoclimatic reconstructions suggest relatively favorable temperatures between the 7th and early 9th centuries, supporting agricultural reliability. Stable harvest cycles reduced migratory pressures and enabled permanent village formation. When combined with natural boundaries, these environmental factors encouraged demographic concentration within the basin rather than dispersal across peripheral highlands. The basin's relative isolation fostered internal cultural cohesion. Archaeological typologies of pottery styles show increasing homogeneity across central Bohemia by the 8th century. Burial customs similarly demonstrate shared ritual patterns, including inhumation graves accompanied by modest grave goods. Such uniformity indicates interaction among communities and suggests emerging regional identity. Geography facilitated communication within the basin while moderating external cultural influence. This pattern laid groundwork for political unification in subsequent centuries. At the same time, the basin was not entirely insular. Trade artifacts recovered from sites near the Elbe confirm contact with Carolingian territories. According to Frankish annals, Slavic groups east of Bavaria engaged in diplomatic exchanges and occasional military confrontation. These references imply that Bohemia occupied a frontier zone between expanding Frankish authority and Slavic polities to the east. Its geographic enclosure enabled defensive resilience, yet its river systems integrated it into continental developments. Strategic defensibility became increasingly significant as regional power structures consolidated. Elevated promontories near present-day Prague provided commanding views over river crossings. Excavations at Prague Castle reveal occupation layers dating to the late 9th century, built upon earlier fortified sites. While the political institutions of the Kingdom of Bohemia lay centuries in the future, the geographic logic of central authority was already evident. Control of river junctions and access routes offered both economic oversight and military advantage. The cumulative effect of these environmental factors produced a territorially coherent zone predisposed to centralized leadership. Natural borders reduced fragmentation, fertile land sustained population density, and river corridors linked interior settlements. Archaeological evidence demonstrates gradual intensification of settlement, fortification, and agricultural production between the 6th and 9th centuries. Geography did not determine political outcomes in isolation, but it structured the range of viable strategies available to emerging elites. By the end of the 9th century, the Bohemian Basin functioned as a recognizable territorial unit within Central Europe. Its mountains defined its perimeter, its rivers unified its interior, its resources sustained demographic growth. These geographic conditions formed the structural foundation upon which later dynastic authority would build. As Slavic populations settled the basin in the 6th century, geography began interacting directly with emerging tribal leadership and the earliest stages of political consolidation. Before continuing into the historical development of early Bohemia, viewers are encouraged to support the channel by subscribing and activating notifications. Subscribing ensures access to future long-form historical documentaries released under the Nightfall History series. Activating the notification bell provides updates for each new release, including daily historical content. Viewers may also share in the comments which segment they found most informative or analytically compelling, contributing to ongoing discussion and refinement of future documentaries. By the late 9th century, tribal leadership in Bohemia began evolving into dynastic authority. What had previously been a network of loosely organized Slavic communities was gradually consolidating around fortified centers and hereditary rulership. This transformation did not occur abruptly. It emerged from demographic settlement, external pressure, and religious integration across the 6th to 9th centuries. Following the migration period of the 5th century, West Slavic groups moved into territories formerly dominated by Germanic tribes such as the Marcomanni and Lombards. Archaeological evidence indicates that these Slavic settlers established agricultural villages characterized by sunken featured dwellings, handmade pottery, and cremation burial practices. Sites across central Bohemia, including those near the Vltava River basin, demonstrate continuity of settlement from the late 6th century onward. Material culture associated with the Prague-type ceramics confirms a broader West Slavic cultural horizon extending into Moravia and southern Poland. Settlement patterns reveal dispersed village clusters rather than centralized urban structures. Authority during this period appears to have been organized around clan leadership and fortified hilltop refuges. Archaeologists have identified numerous radiska, earth and timber fortifications positioned strategically along rivers and trade routes. These fortified centers likely served as administrative and defensive hubs for surrounding communities. Excavations at Levy Hradec and Budek indicate organized labor and surplus production, suggesting the emergence of local elites capable of coordinating construction and resource distribution. External political pressures contributed to internal consolidation. In the 7th century, the region fell within the orbit of the short-lived confederation traditionally associated with Samo, a Frankish merchant who, according to the Fredegar Chronicle, led a Slavic alliance against Avar domination. Although Samo's polity did not persist beyond the mid-7th century, the episode demonstrates early supertribal coordination among Slavic groups in Central Europe. Records indicate that Slavic leaders were capable of forming temporary federations in response to military threat. During the 8th and early 9th centuries, the expansion of the Carolingian Empire under rulers such as Charlemagne reshaped Central European political dynamics. Frankish annals refer to campaigns against Slavic groups east of Bavaria. Tributary relationships and intermittent military confrontations suggest that Bohemian leaders engaged diplomatically with Carolingian authorities. Imported artifacts, including Carolingian-style weaponry and metal fittings uncovered in Bohemian graves, confirm sustained cross-border contact. Simultaneously, the rise of Great Moravia in the mid-9th century introduced a powerful Slavic polity to the east. Archaeological and textual evidence demonstrates that Bohemia fell within the cultural and ecclesiastical sphere of Great Moravia during this period. Missionary activity associated with Saints Cyril and Methodius expanded Christian influence among Slavic elites. Although direct documentation of early Christian communities in Bohemia is limited, later chronicles connect the first confirmed Premyslid ruler, Bořivojai, to Moravian baptism. Bořivojai, traditionally dated to c. 870 to 889, occupies a transitional position between legend and documented history. The 12th century chronicler Cosmas of Prague records that Bořivoj was baptized by Archbishop Methodius and established a church dedicated to Saint Clement at Levy Hradec. While Cosmas wrote several centuries after the events described, archaeological excavations at Levy Hradec have uncovered early church foundations consistent with late 9th century construction. These findings support the broader pattern of Christianization among ruling elites. Christian conversion altered the structure of political legitimacy. Pagan ritual authority, previously embedded in tribal custom, increasingly coexisted with ecclesiastical endorsement. Baptism connected Bohemian rulers to broader Latin Christian networks, providing diplomatic recognition beyond regional tribal alliances. Ecclesiastical architecture, stone churches replacing wooden shrines, visibly reinforced new forms of authority. Religious affiliation thus functioned as both spiritual transformation and political strategy. Prague emerged during this period as a central fortified site. Excavations at Prague Castle reveal occupation layers and fortification systems dating to the late 9th century. Strategic placement above the Vltava River allowed oversight of trade routes and regional communication corridors. Concentration of resources and defensive structures at Prague indicates movement toward centralized governance. While tribal assemblies may have persisted, hereditary succession increasingly characterized leadership. Burial evidence further reflects social stratification. Elite graves from the late 9th century contain swords, spurs, and imported luxury goods, distinguishing ruling families from common agrarian populations. Such differentiation suggests consolidation of wealth and military authority within a narrower lineage group. The gradual dominance of the Premyslid dynasty over competing clans likely emerged from this concentration of military resources and territorial control. Following the decline of Great Moravia in the early 10th century, Bohemian rulers operated with increased autonomy. However, foundations for centralized authority had already been established. Fortified centers, Christian institutions, and hereditary leadership combined to form a proto-state structure. The transition from tribal confederation to dynastic rule did not eliminate local governance, but it subordinated regional elites to a principal ruler based in Prague. By the end of the 9th century, Bohemia possessed identifiable characteristics of early medieval statehood: territorial cohesion, dynastic continuity, ecclesiastical infrastructure, and strategic fortified capitals. Documentary references remain sparse, yet archaeological findings corroborate the emergence of centralized authority during this period. Political legitimacy increasingly derived from both lineage and Christian affiliation. As the 10th century began, Bohemian rulers entered more formalized diplomatic relationships with neighboring powers. Christianization and dynastic consolidation provided the structural basis for engagement with expanding imperial institutions to the west. These developments positioned Bohemia for integration into the broader political framework of Central Europe under the emerging structures of the Holy Roman Empire. Bohemia's rulers navigated a delicate balance between independence and imperial obligation. Positioned between the expanding German kingdom to the west and Slavic polities to the east, the Duchy of Bohemia entered the 10th century as a consolidating power whose survival depended upon diplomatic calculation. Its integration into the emerging structures of the Holy Roman Empire developed through tribute, ecclesiastical alignment, and negotiated subordination. In the early 10th century, the pre-Mislid ruler Wenceslaus I, traditionally dated 921 to 935, governed a duchy still consolidating internal authority. Contemporary references, including those preserved in Widukind of Corvy's residential Gesti Saxonicae, indicate that Bohemia fell within the sphere of the East Frankish king Henry I, known as Henry the Fowler. Records suggest that in 929 or 930, Henry conducted a campaign toward Prague, compelling Wenceslaus to acknowledge Saxon overlordship and to render tribute. This tribute relationship did not erase internal autonomy, but formalized Bohemia's position within a broader imperial hierarchy. The tribute arrangement served reciprocal purposes. For the Ottonian rulers, Bohemia functioned as a buffer zone against Magyar incursions and eastern instability. For the pre-Mislids, recognition by a powerful monarch reduced the likelihood of destructive raids and enhanced dynastic legitimacy. Tribute payments, recorded in annalistic sources, symbolized vassalage without requiring full administrative absorption. This structure reflects a pattern common to frontier duchies within the empire. Internal governance remained local, while external allegiance reinforced imperial supremacy. The assassination of Wenceslaus in 935 by his brother Boleslaus I did not dissolve the relationship with Saxony. Instead, Boleslaus pursued a more assertive regional policy while maintaining tributary ties. Under Boleslaus IR 935 to 972, Bohemia expanded territorially into Moravia and parts of Silesia. Archaeological evidence indicates intensified fortification and minting activity during his reign. Yet despite military assertiveness, Bohemia remained formally subordinate to the Ottonian dynasty. Otto I's victory over the Magyars at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955 stabilized Central Europe and reinforced imperial authority. Bohemian forces reportedly participated in campaigns under Otto's leadership, suggesting cooperative military engagement. According to imperial chronicles, such participation strengthened Bohemia's standing within the empire. Military collaboration functioned as both obligation and opportunity, allowing Bohemian rulers to demonstrate loyalty while expanding influence eastward. A decisive institutional development occurred in 973 with the establishment of the Bishopric of Prague. Prior to this date, ecclesiastical oversight in Bohemia fell under the authority of the Bishopric of Regensburg in Bavaria. The creation of a separate bishopric, confirmed by Emperor Otto I and Pope Benedict VI, marked a structural shift. The first bishop, Thietmar, assumed authority over a defined diocesan territory centered in Prague. Records indicate that this reorganization reduced Bavarian ecclesiastical influence and strengthened local integration within imperial church structures. The establishment of a bishopric carried political implications. Control over ecclesiastical appointments allowed the Premislids to align religious administration with dynastic interests. Stone church construction increased during this period, with archaeological remains at Prague Castle and Budek confirming expansion of Christian infrastructure. Integration into the Latin ecclesiastical hierarchy reinforced Bohemia's identification with the Western Christian world rather than the Byzantine sphere. Despite these developments, tensions persisted between autonomy and oversight. Under Boleslaus II, r. 972 to 999, Bohemia maintained active diplomatic relations with neighboring polities while acknowledging imperial authority. The duchy issued coinage bearing Christian symbolism, demonstrating participation in broader economic networks. Yet succession disputes and noble rivalries occasionally invited imperial intervention. Imperial confirmation of ducal authority became a mechanism through which the emperor reinforced supremacy. The 11th century witnessed oscillations in Bohemian autonomy. Duke Bretislaus I.R. 1035 to 1055 pursued expansion into Poland and sought to elevate Bohemia's status within the empire. His campaigns temporarily secured control over Silesian territories and transported relics of Saint Adalbert to Prague. However, Emperor Henry III responded militarily in 1040 and 1041, compelling Bretislaus to renew homage. Contemporary records describe the duke's submission and reaffirmation of vassal obligations. This episode illustrates the limits of ducal independence when imperial power was consolidated. Feudal structures within the empire formalized Bohemia's constitutional position. Dukes attended imperial assemblies and participated in military campaigns as imperial princes. Although Bohemia possessed distinct Slavic linguistic and cultural characteristics, its rulers operated within German-dominated political frameworks. Imperial charters from the 11th century reference Bohemian dukes among the leading princes of the realm. Their inclusion signified elevated rank but confirmed subordination. Economic integration accompanied political alignment. Trade routes linking Prague to Regensburg and Mainz facilitated exchange of silver, livestock, and manufactured goods. Archaeologists have identified imported ceramics and coinage within Bohemian urban centers, confirming sustained cross-border commerce. Such interaction deepened interdependence between the duchy and imperial territories. Economic participation reinforced the rationale for maintaining imperial allegiance. At the same time, internal consolidation continued. Fortified administrative centers multiplied, and the Prague castle complex expanded. Written sources indicate increasing bureaucratic organization around ducal courts. Noble families gained influence, but ducal authority remained central. The combination of Christian legitimacy, military cooperation, and economic integration positioned Bohemia as a stable frontier duchy within the empire. The relationship with the Ottonian and later Salian dynasties established a constitutional precedent. Bohemia was neither fully independent nor directly administered. Instead, it functioned as a semi-autonomous principality bound by tribute, homage, and ecclesiastical alignment. This arrangement allowed local rulers to govern internal affairs while participating in imperial politics. By the late 11th century, Bohemian rulers had secured a recognized role among imperial princes. Their participation in imperial campaigns and assemblies reinforced their prominence. Although the ducal title remained subordinate to the emperor, the structural foundation for elevated status had been laid. Through sustained negotiation between autonomy and loyalty, the Duchy of Bohemia embedded itself within the political architecture of the Holy Roman Empire. This evolving relationship created conditions under which imperial favor could translate into enhanced rank. As imperial politics shifted in the late 11th and early 12th centuries, opportunities emerged for Bohemian rulers to convert loyal service into formal recognition. Imperial recognition would, in time, elevate Bohemia from a duchy bound by vassalage to a kingdom acknowledged within the constitutional hierarchy of the empire. In 1212, a royal charter permanently altered Bohemia's constitutional position. What had long functioned as a powerful duchy within the Holy Roman imperial hierarchy was formally recognized as a hereditary kingdom. This transformation was not sudden. It developed through decades of political negotiation, military cooperation, and calculated alignment with imperial factions. The first elevation of a Bohemian ruler to royal status occurred in 1085 under Vladislaus II, r. 1061 to 1092. During the investiture controversy, which divided Emperor Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII, Vladislaus supported the emperor militarily and diplomatically. Contemporary sources, including imperial charters, record that Henry IV granted Vladislaus the royal title in recognition of his loyalty. However, this kingship was explicitly personal and non-hereditary. Upon Vladislaus's death in 1092, the title lapsed, and Bohemia reverted formally to ducal status. The temporary royal elevation reveals the transactional nature of imperial favor. The emperor possessed authority to elevate loyal princes, but such honors depended upon sustained political support. Bohemia's geographic position made its military backing valuable during imperial conflicts in Saxony and Italy. In return, Vladislaus secured prestige and precedence among imperial princes. Yet, without hereditary recognition, the constitutional status of Bohemia remained fundamentally unchanged. Throughout the 12th century, Bohemian rulers continued to navigate imperial politics to enhance their autonomy. Vladislaus II r. 1140 to 1172, received a royal title from Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa in 1158, again as a reward for military assistance during campaigns in northern Italy. As with Vladislaus, the title was non-hereditary. Upon Vladislaus's abdication, the kingdom reverted to ducal rank. These repeated but temporary elevations demonstrate that Bohemia had become indispensable enough to merit royal dignity, yet not institutionally secure enough to retain it permanently. Internal political consolidation accompanied these external negotiations. By the late 12th century, the Premyslid dynasty had strengthened control over noble factions and fortified administrative centers. Coinage reforms and expanded fortification at Prague Castle reflect growing stability. Economic growth, particularly in agricultural production and early mining ventures, increased ducal revenues. This internal strength provided leverage in imperial diplomacy. A decisive turning point occurred during the civil wars that followed the death of Emperor Henry VI in 1197. Competing claimants, Philip of Swabia and Otto IV of Brunswick, sought support from leading princes. Ottokar I of Bohemia r. 1198 to 1230, aligned himself strategically during this contested succession. In 1198, Philip of Swabia recognized Ottokar as King of Bohemia, marking a renewed elevation. However, lasting confirmation required broader imperial settlement. The final and permanent resolution emerged under Emperor Frederick II. On September 26, 1212, Frederick issued the Golden Bull of Sicily, a formal charter granting hereditary kingship to Ottokar I and his successors. The document survives in multiple manuscript copies and outlines constitutional privileges for the Bohemian crown. It confirmed that the King of Bohemia would hold his title hereditarily without requiring renewed imperial investiture for each succession. This provision removed a significant source of uncertainty that had characterized earlier reigns. The Golden Bull of Sicily also defined Bohemia's obligations and rights within the empire. The king was required to attend imperial diets when held within reasonable geographic proximity, but his duties were more limited than those of many German princes. The charter confirmed the king's role as one of the principal electors in imperial coronations, though formal codification of electoral procedures would later be clarified in the Golden Bull of 1356. Nonetheless, the 1212 charter elevated Bohemia's constitutional rank significantly above that of a typical duchy. This institutional shift altered the balance of power within Central Europe. Hereditary kingship strengthened internal political continuity. Succession disputes could now be framed within an established royal framework rather than renegotiated as ducal appointments subject to imperial discretion. The stability of dynastic inheritance reduced opportunities for imperial intervention in Bohemian affairs. Royal status also enhanced diplomatic standing in negotiations with neighboring rulers in Hungary, Austria, and Poland. Territorial expansion followed constitutional elevation. During the early 13th century, the Premyslid monarchy extended influence into Austria and Styria. Although full consolidation occurred under later rulers, the structural authority granted by hereditary kingship enabled more assertive foreign policy. Royal rank conferred symbolic parity with other crowned rulers, facilitating marriage alliances and territorial claims. Administrative development intensified after 1212. Royal charters proliferated, granting privileges to towns and monasteries. Written documentation became more standardized, reflecting institutional maturation. The crown's authority over coinage, taxation, and military levies expanded. Archaeological evidence from Prague and other urban centers indicates increased stone construction and planned fortifications, suggesting long-term investment in royal infrastructure. The transformation from duchy to hereditary kingdom did not sever Bohemia from the Holy Roman Empire. Instead, it redefined its position within imperial structures. The King of Bohemia remained an imperial prince and participated in imperial assemblies. However, the balance shifted toward greater internal autonomy combined with elevated status. The imperial framework now recognized Bohemia as a constituent kingdom rather than a subordinate duchy. Economic conditions reinforced this political ascent. Agricultural expansion and early exploitation of mineral resources increased revenues available to the crown. Trade routes linking Prague to German and Italian markets strengthened economic integration without diminishing sovereignty. Royal authority over customs duties and minting enhanced fiscal independence. Such resources underwrote military campaigns and administrative reform. The constitutional settlement of 1212 represented the culmination of a century-long process of negotiation between loyalty and ambition. Earlier royal titles had demonstrated Bohemia's strategic importance, but only through sustained diplomatic maneuvering did the pre-Mislid dynasty secure permanence. The Golden Bull of Sicily institutionalized what had previously been contingent. By the early 13th century, the Kingdom of Bohemia stood as a recognized and hereditary monarchy within the Holy Roman Empire. Its rulers possessed defined privileges, territorial ambitions, and strengthened internal structures. The elevation reshaped Central European political equilibrium and provided the framework for intensified state-building. With royal authority secured, internal administration and urban growth intensified, setting the stage for broader economic and institutional expansion in the decades that followed. Bohemia's transformation into a structured kingdom depended on administrative precision. Royal authority in the 13th century was no longer sustained solely by dynastic legitimacy or military force. It required institutional frameworks capable of managing territory, revenue, law, and urban expansion. Under the reign of Ottokar II, r. 1253 to 1278, these frameworks matured into a centralized system that reshaped the kingdom's internal organization. The consolidation of royal authority began with the expansion of castle administration. Royal castles functioned not only as defensive strongholds but as administrative centers overseeing surrounding lands. Archaeological investigations at sites such as Bezdez and Zvikov reveal planned stone fortifications constructed during the mid-13th century. These castles housed burgraves, royal officials appointed directly by the crown. Records indicate that burgraves exercised judicial authority, supervised tax collection, and coordinated military levies. By placing trusted officials rather than hereditary nobles in these positions, the monarchy strengthened direct oversight of provincial territories. Written charters from the period demonstrate increasing bureaucratic sophistication. Royal decrees standardized obligations owed by nobles and towns. The chancery expanded, producing Latin-language documents that defined land tenure, privileges, and legal procedures. Surviving diplomatic records show consistent formulaic structure, indicating administrative regularization. This growing documentary culture reflects the institutional maturity of the pre-Mislid monarchy and its integration into broader European governance norms. Feudal relationships also underwent refinement. While noble families retained significant influence, the crown asserted greater control over appointments and land grants. Feudal tenure in Bohemia combined Slavic customary elements with Western European legal models. According to contemporary legal codifications, service to the king, primarily military, formed the foundation of noble obligation. However, 13th century reforms clarified these duties in written form, reducing ambiguity and reinforcing centralized expectations. Royal authority thus shifted from negotiated custom toward documented obligation. Parallel to administrative centralization, demographic transformation reshaped the kingdom's social landscape. The process known as Ostsiedlung, eastward settlement of German-speaking populations, accelerated during the 13th century. Encouraged by royal policy, Settlers migrated from regions such as Bavaria and Saxony into Bohemian territories. Archaeological and linguistic evidence confirms the establishment of new villages and towns with planned layouts distinct from earlier Slavic settlements. These communities often operated under German municipal law, particularly Magdeburg law. Magdeburg law provided a standardized legal framework for urban governance. It defined the rights of burghers, regulated trade, and established municipal courts independent of feudal lords. Royal charters granted towns the authority to elect councils, administer justice, and collect certain taxes. Surviving charters for towns such as Brno and Plzeň detail privileges including market rights and fortification permissions. By institutionalizing municipal autonomy within a royal framework, the crown encouraged economic growth while securing loyalty from emerging urban elites. Urban foundations followed strategic considerations. Many towns were established along trade routes or near resource-rich regions. Brno, positioned in Moravia, connected Bohemia with Austria and Hungary. Plzeň, founded in 1295 slightly after Ottokar II's reign but within the broader administrative reform era, occupied a junction of commercial pathways linking Prague with western territories. Grid-pattern street plans and central market squares reveal deliberate urban planning. Archaeological surveys document rapid construction of stone houses and defensive walls, reflecting economic vitality. Royal sponsorship of urbanization served fiscal objectives. Towns paid regular taxes and customs duties to the crown. Unlike rural estates controlled by nobles, chartered towns provided predictable revenue streams. Market tolls and trade levies increased royal income without requiring constant military enforcement. The rise of towns thus complemented castle-based administration by diversifying financial resources. The monarchy also strengthened judicial structures. Regional courts supervised by royal officials reduced reliance on purely customary arbitration. Legal disputes increasingly referenced written statutes. While feudal courts persisted, appellate authority often rested with the king or his delegates. This judicial layering reinforced centralized sovereignty while accommodating local practice. Records indicate that royal confirmation was required for significant noble inheritances, further integrating aristocratic power into the crown's legal framework. Military organization evolved alongside administrative reform. Royal castles stored arms and provisions, enabling rapid mobilization. Nobles owed mounted service, while towns contributed infantry contingents when required. This integration of rural and urban military obligations strengthened defensive capacity. The centralized coordination of levies distinguished the 13th century kingdom from earlier decentralized tribal structures. Economic growth accompanied institutional consolidation. Agricultural expansion into forested regions increased arable land. German settlers introduced advanced plowing techniques and three-field crop rotation, as evidenced by archaeobotanical studies. Increased productivity supported population growth and urban markets. Surplus grain and livestock flowed toward towns, where craftsmen and merchants facilitated redistribution. Territorial ambition under Ottokar II further emphasized administrative efficiency. During his reign, Bohemia temporarily extended influence into Austria, Styria, and Carinthia. Managing these acquisitions required consistent governance mechanisms. Royal officials were appointed to newly integrated territories, applying similar administrative models. Although Ottokar's expansion ultimately faltered after his defeat by Rudolf of Habsburg in 1278, the internal administrative systems he developed endured within Bohemia itself. The integration of diverse legal and cultural traditions characterized this era. Slavic customary practices coexisted with imported German legal codes. Latin served as the language of official documentation, reinforcing alignment with Western Christendom. The monarchy balanced these influences to maintain stability. Administrative coherence did not eliminate regional diversity but structured it within an overarching royal system. By the late 13th century, the Kingdom of Bohemia exhibited characteristics of a mature medieval state. Centralized fiscal mechanisms, codified feudal obligations, urban self-governance under royal oversight, and fortified administrative centers. Archaeological remains, written charters, and municipal records collectively demonstrate institutional depth unprecedented in earlier centuries. These reforms transformed Bohemia from a primarily territorial monarchy into an economically integrated and administratively coordinated kingdom. Governance mechanisms expanded beyond personal rule into durable institutions capable of sustaining territorial authority. Urban foundations multiplied, castle networks stabilized frontier zones, and written law formalized obligations. As towns flourished and administrative systems matured, the kingdom's economic integration with surrounding regions intensified. Urbanization stimulated trade networks across Central Europe, linking Bohemia more firmly to continental commercial systems and setting the stage for further economic expansion in the decades ahead. Silver reshaped the political economy of Bohemia. In the closing decades of the 13th century, mineral wealth extracted from beneath the soil altered fiscal structures, strengthened royal authority, and integrated the kingdom into European monetary systems. The discovery of major silver deposits near Kutna Ora did not merely increase revenue. It redefined the scale and mechanisms of state power. Archaeological and geological evidence confirms that significant silver lodes were identified in the Kutna Ora region during the 1290s, under the reign of Wenceslaus II, r. 1278 to 1305. Mining activity expanded rapidly, attracting settlers, prospectors, and technical specialists from German-speaking regions with prior mining experience. Excavations in the area reveal extensive shaft systems, smelting sites, and mining settlements constructed within a short period. Contemporary documentation, including royal charters, records the crown's direct interest in organizing and regulating extraction. The influx of silver required administrative coordination. To prevent uncontrolled exploitation and noble appropriation, the monarchy asserted regalian rights over mineral resources. These rights declared that subterranean wealth belonged to the king, regardless of surface land ownership. Such claims aligned with broader European mining traditions but were formalized with particular clarity in Bohemia. In 1300, the mining code known as the Ius Regale Montanorum was issued, traditionally attributed to the Juris Gatius of Orvieto at the request of Wenceslaus II. Surviving manuscripts of this code detail procedures for prospecting, claim registration, labor obligations, and revenue distribution. The Ius Regale Montanorum standardized legal relations within the mining sector. It defined the rights of miners, established courts to resolve disputes, and specified the crown's share of extracted silver. By codifying regulations, the monarchy reduced conflict among competing interests and ensured predictable fiscal returns. Legal uniformity also encouraged foreign specialists to settle in Kutna Ora, confident that their investments would be protected by royal authority. The expansion of mining stimulated urban growth. Kutna Ora evolved from a rural settlement into one of Central Europe's most economically significant towns within a generation. Archaeological surveys indicate rapid construction of stone houses, churches, and defensive works. Population estimates suggest several thousand inhabitants by the early 14th century. The concentration of skilled labor, merchants, and administrators transformed the town into a financial center directly tied to the crown. Silver extraction enabled a critical monetary reform. In 1300, Wenceslaus II introduced a new silver coin, the Prog-Groschen, Grossus Progensis. Minted from high-quality silver sourced from Kutna Ora, the coin adhered to consistent weight and purity standards. Numismatic studies confirm that the Prog-Groschen achieved wide circulation beyond Bohemia, appearing in hordes across Poland, Hungary, and the German territories. Its reliability enhanced confidence in Bohemian currency and facilitated long-distance trade. The establishment of a centralized mint reinforced royal fiscal control. Coin production was supervised by appointed officials, and minting rights remained firmly under crown authority. Revenue derived not only from silver extraction but also from seigniorage, the profit generated from minting coins at a value exceeding the cost of metal content. This financial mechanism provided the monarchy with steady income independent of feudal levies. Monetary reform supported broader economic integration. Markets within Bohemia increasingly operated using standardized coinage rather than barter or fragmented local currencies. Town charters from the early 14th century reference transactions denominated in Prague groschen. The widespread adoption of coinage facilitated tax collection, commercial contracts, and wage payments. Economic complexity expanded as monetary exchange replaced in-kind obligations. The fiscal strength derived from silver also enhanced diplomatic leverage. Wenceslas II utilized mining revenue to pursue dynastic ambitions beyond Bohemia. Through marriage alliances and military intervention, he briefly secured the Polish crown in 1300. Contemporary chronicles note the financial capacity that underwrote these campaigns. Silver revenue thus translated directly into geopolitical influence. Mining activity required technological innovation. Archaeologists have identified drainage systems, timber reinforcement techniques, and smelting furnaces indicative of advanced metallurgical knowledge. German miners introduced expertise in deep-shaft excavation and/or processing. Written sources describe cooperative labor structures, including partnerships among miners who shared investment and profit. The technical demands of silver extraction fostered specialized communities governed by distinct legal norms under royal oversight. Economic expansion extended beyond mining itself. Increased purchasing power in Kutna Hora and Prague stimulated demand for agricultural produce and manufactured goods. Surrounding rural areas intensified production to supply growing urban populations. Trade routes connecting Bohemia to Nuremberg, Vienna, and Krakow carried both silver and finished products. Merchant networks expanded, and customs duties provided additional income to the crown. The social structure of the kingdom adapted to economic transformation. Wealth generated by mining created new elite groups, including urban patricians and financiers. These groups gained influence in municipal councils while remaining dependent on royal favor for mining privileges. The monarchy balanced noble interests with urban stakeholders, ensuring that mineral wealth did not empower rivals beyond control. Records indicate that royal courts increasingly relied on monetary taxation rather than exclusively feudal service. This shift reduced dependence on traditional aristocratic levies and allowed the king to hire mercenaries or fund infrastructure projects. Fiscal autonomy strengthened central authority and diminished fragmentation. However, rapid expansion also introduced vulnerability. Mining productivity fluctuated with geological conditions and labor stability. Crown policy therefore emphasized legal order and dispute resolution to maintain consistent output. The mining courts established under the ius regale montanorum played a critical role in sustaining operational continuity. By the early 14th century, Bohemia had become one of Europe's leading silver producers. The Prague groschen circulated widely, enhancing the kingdom's reputation for monetary reliability. Mining law provided administrative clarity, while urban growth anchored economic networks. Archaeological remains of shafts and smelting complexes testify to the scale of extraction achieved within a relatively short period. The transformation initiated in the 1290s extended beyond economic metrics. Silver revenue enabled infrastructural investment, strengthened dynastic authority, and elevated Bohemia's standing within the Holy Roman Empire. Fiscal resources translated into political weight. Through control of mineral wealth and standardized coinage, the monarchy secured a foundation for expanded influence. By the beginning of the 14th century, Bohemia possessed both administrative cohesion and substantial financial capacity. Economic prosperity positioned the kingdom for heightened political prominence within imperial structures, laying material groundwork for the dynastic and cultural ascendancy that would characterize its imperial zenith in the decades ahead. A foreign dynasty reoriented Bohemia toward continental politics. In 1310, the accession of John of Luxembourg marked the end of uninterrupted pre-Mislid rule and the beginning of a new dynastic phase that connected the Kingdom of Bohemia more directly to the strategic rivalries of Western Europe. His reign did not center on domestic consolidation alone. It repositioned Bohemia within a broader diplomatic and military network extending from the Rhineland to northern Italy. The extinction of the male pre-Mislid line in 1306, following the assassination of Wenceslas III, created a succession crisis. Competing claimants sought recognition from the Bohemian estates and the Holy Roman Emperor. Henry of Carinthia briefly secured the throne but faced opposition from powerful noble factions. In 1310, John of Luxembourg, son of Emperor Henry VII, married Elizabeth of Bohemia, daughter of Wenceslas II. This marriage provided dynastic legitimacy, and with imperial backing, John entered Prague and assumed the crown. John's accession illustrates the intersection of imperial authority and local aristocratic interests. Bohemian nobles supported his candidacy partly to secure stability after years of political uncertainty. However, his position depended on negotiation with these elites. Early charters confirmed that John granted privileges to leading noble families, reinforcing their role in governance while consolidating his own authority. This arrangement stabilized succession but limited immediate royal centralization. John's reign was characterized by extensive diplomatic activity beyond Bohemia. As Count of Luxembourg and King of Bohemia, he maintained ties with Western imperial territories and the French monarchy. Records indicate frequent absences from Prague as he participated in imperial politics, Italian campaigns, and French military engagements. His mobility reflected the trans-regional character of Luxembourg power, contrasting with the more territorially focused pre-Mislid tradition. Despite his physical absence, John pursued territorial consolidation within Central Europe. His most significant expansion occurred in Silesia. During the 1320s and 1330s, numerous Silesian Piast dukes acknowledged John's overlordship. Treaties preserved in diplomatic collections confirm that these dukes accepted vassal status in exchange for protection and recognition of their hereditary rights. By 1335, much of Silesia had entered the Bohemian sphere, although it retained local autonomy under its own rulers. The incorporation of Silesia expanded Bohemia's economic and strategic reach. The region contained important trade routes connecting Poland, Moravia, and the German lands. Its towns, including Wrocław, Breslau, contributed commercial vitality. Through feudal agreements rather than direct annexation, John extended Bohemian influence while minimizing administrative strain. This approach exemplifies a model of dynastic expansion grounded in vassalage rather than territorial absorption. John also engaged in complex diplomacy with Poland and Hungary. In 1335, the Congress of Visegrad brought together John, King Charles I of Hungary, and King Casimir III of Poland. Contemporary records describe negotiations over Polish succession and regional stability. John agreed to renounce claims to the Polish crown in exchange for financial compensation and recognition of Bohemian rights in Silesia. This settlement reduced potential conflict and clarified territorial spheres of influence in Central Europe. Military engagement remained a consistent feature of John's rule. He participated in imperial campaigns in northern Italy, supporting the interests of Emperor Louis IV during conflicts with the papacy. Chroniclers such as Jean Froissart later described John's chivalric reputation and involvement in Western European warfare. Although Froissart wrote decades after John's death, corroborating sources confirm his participation in broader continental conflicts. These engagements enhanced his prestige but diverted attention from domestic governance. Within Bohemia, royal administration continued to function through established institutions. The Chancery issued charters regulating towns, confirming noble privileges, and overseeing ecclesiastical appointments. Mining revenues from Kutna Ora remained central to fiscal stability. Numismatic evidence indicates continued production of the Prague groschen, sustaining economic continuity established under the Premislids. Royal income enabled John to finance foreign campaigns without dismantling internal administrative structures. However, his frequent absences created tension with segments of the Bohemian nobility. Chronicles suggest dissatisfaction among nobles who sought stronger local leadership. John responded by appointing trusted officials to oversee Prague and regional castles. The governance model relied on delegation, with burgraves and royal officers maintaining continuity. This system prevented fragmentation despite limited direct royal presence. Religious institutions also played a stabilizing role. The Archbishopric of Prague, established in 1344 shortly before John's death but during the broader Luxembourg ascendancy, reflected long-term ecclesiastical ambition. While formally realized under his successor, groundwork for elevation of Prague's ecclesiastical status occurred during John's reign through diplomatic engagement with the papacy. The strengthening of church institutions paralleled dynastic consolidation. John's foreign alliances integrated Bohemia into Western European political culture. His son, Charles, later Charles IV, was educated in France, reflecting deliberate orientation toward Latin intellectual and courtly traditions. This transnational upbringing would influence future governance. The Luxembourg dynasty thus embedded Bohemia within a network of aristocratic and imperial relationships extending beyond its immediate geographic boundaries. The final phase of John's life underscored his continental engagement. In 1346, he fought alongside the French King Philip VI at the Battle of Crécy during the Hundred Years' War. Contemporary sources report that John, despite failing eyesight, entered battle and was killed. His death symbolized the extent of his involvement in Western conflicts. Though geographically distant from Prague, his participation reflected the dynasty's international commitments. John's reign redefined Bohemia's external posture. While internal administration remained intact, the kingdom's political identity expanded beyond regional confines. Silesian vassalage strengthened territorial reach, diplomatic settlements reduced conflict with neighboring powers, and participation in imperial politics elevated prestige. The monarchy's orientation shifted from defensive consolidation toward active engagement in European power structures. By 1346, Bohemia was firmly integrated into continental diplomacy and dynastic networks. The Luxembourg dynasty had secured territorial influence in Silesia and established international alliances. Administrative continuity and economic stability sustained this outward expansion. The kingdom's strategic position within the Holy Roman Empire now rested on broader foundations than regional authority alone. These developments created conditions for unprecedented transformation under John's successor. The combination of dynastic legitimacy, expanded influence, and continental integration prepared Bohemia for a new phase of prominence. His successor would transform Prague into an imperial capital, elevating the kingdom from regional power to the political center of the empire. By the mid-14th century, Prague stood at the political center of Europe. Under the rule of Charles IV, r. 1346 to 1378 as King of Bohemia, emperor from 1355, the kingdom entered a period often characterized as its medieval zenith. His reign combined dynastic ambition, institutional reform, architectural patronage, and legal codification. Unlike his father, whose authority operated through transregional chivalric engagement, Charles pursued a deliberate strategy of imperial centralization rooted in Prague itself. Born in 1316 as Wenceslas, Charles was the son of John of Luxembourg and Elizabeth of Bohemia. Raised at the French court and educated in Paris, he adopted the name Charles in honor of his confirmation sponsor, King Charles IV of France. His education exposed him to scholastic philosophy, canon law, and administrative practice. This intellectual formation profoundly shaped his governance. Unlike many medieval rulers whose legitimacy derived primarily from military capacity, Charles cultivated learning, diplomacy, and legal order as instruments of authority. Charles became King of Bohemia in 1346 during his father's lifetime, in circumstances shaped by imperial conflict. He was elected King of the Romans in opposition to Emperor Louis IV, reflecting divisions within the Holy Roman Empire. After John's death at Crécy, Charles consolidated his position gradually, securing recognition from key princes. In 1355, he was crowned Holy Roman Emperor in Rome. From that point forward, Prague functioned not merely as a royal capital but as the administrative and symbolic center of imperial governance. One of Charles's earliest structural achievements was the elevation of Prague's ecclesiastical status. In 1344, shortly before his full accession but during the Luxembourg consolidation, the bishopric of Prague was raised to an archbishopric. This change detached Bohemia ecclesiastically from the Archdiocese of Mainz and enhanced local autonomy. The first archbishop, Arnost of Pardubice, became a key collaborator in Charles's reforms. The archbishopric reinforced Prague's spiritual authority and aligned ecclesiastical structures with royal ambitions. In 1348, Charles founded Charles University, the first university in Central Europe. Modeled on Paris and Bologna, it included faculties of theology, law, medicine, and arts. The Foundation Charter, preserved in Latin, emphasizes the promotion of learning for the honor of God and the utility of the realm. The university attracted scholars from across the empire, contributing to Prague's intellectual prestige. Its establishment institutionalized education within the kingdom and strengthened clerical and administrative capacity. Urban development formed another pillar of Charles's program. In 1348, he initiated the construction of the new town, Nove Mesto, adjacent to the medieval Old Town. The urban plan integrated marketplaces, churches, and administrative spaces within a structured grid. Archaeological evidence confirms coordinated planning rather than organic expansion. This project nearly doubled Prague's urban footprint and demonstrated royal capacity for large-scale civic design. It reflected Charles's intention to transform Prague into a capital comparable to Paris or Rome. Architectural patronage further reinforced imperial symbolism. Construction of St. Vitus Cathedral accelerated under Charles's rule, with architects including Matthias of Arras and later Peter Parler contributing Gothic innovations. The cathedral served not only as a religious center but as a dynastic mausoleum and ceremonial site. Royal coronations and imperial liturgies occurred within its walls, merging sacred and political authority. The cathedral's design incorporated French Gothic influences alongside regional elements, reflecting Charles's trans-European identity. Bridging infrastructure also symbolized renewal. In 1357, Charles initiated construction of the stone bridge across the Vltava River, later known as Charles Bridge. Replacing the earlier Judith Bridge destroyed by flooding, the new bridge enhanced trade, communication, and ceremonial movement between Prague's districts. Its foundation date, July 9, 1357 at 5:31 a.m., was reportedly selected for numerological symmetry, 135797531, illustrating medieval conceptions of cosmic order intertwined with political symbolism. Charles's most consequential legal reform came with the promulgation of the Golden Bull of 1356. Issued in stages at Nuremberg and Metz, the Golden Bull codified procedures for electing the King of the Romans. It confirmed 7 prince-electors, 3 ecclesiastical, Mainz, Trier, Cologne, and 4 secular, Bohemia, the Palatinate, Saxony, Brandenburg. The King of Bohemia was formally recognized as one of these electors, granting the Czech crown permanent constitutional significance within imperial structure. The Golden Bull reduced papal influence over imperial elections and clarified succession mechanisms, diminishing internal disputes. It also enhanced the institutional weight of Bohemia. As both emperor and king-elector, Charles elevated his hereditary realm to a privileged position. The decree functioned as constitutional law for the empire until its dissolution in 1806, underscoring the durability of his reforms. Economically, Charles maintained the mining infrastructure inherited from earlier rulers. Kutna Hora remained a center of silver production, supporting monetary stability through continued minting of the Prague groschen. Trade networks linked Prague with German, Italian, and Baltic markets. Urban privileges encouraged artisan guilds and merchant associations. Surviving charters confirm the granting of rights to towns that stimulated commercial autonomy while preserving royal oversight. Diplomatically, Charles prioritized negotiated settlements over prolonged warfare. He strengthened dynastic ties through strategic marriages involving his children, linking Luxembourg interests with other European houses. Rather than seeking territorial expansion through conquest, he emphasized consolidation. Silesian duchies remained within Bohemian influence, and Moravia retained stability under Luxembourg governance. This measured approach preserved internal cohesion while enhancing prestige. Cultural patronage extended beyond architecture and law. Manuscript production flourished, including illuminated codices commissioned by the court. The emperor himself authored autobiographical reflections in the Vita Caroli, offering insight into his political philosophy and divine interpretation of kingship. These writings portray rulership as divinely ordained yet dependent upon prudent governance. Charles's self-presentation blended piety with pragmatic statecraft. Prague's demographic growth during his reign reflected these transformations. Population estimates suggest substantial urban expansion, making it one of the largest cities north of the Alps. Markets, craft quarters, and ecclesiastical institutions multiplied. The city's skyline, dominated by cathedral towers and fortified walls, embodied both spiritual aspiration and defensive preparedness. Prague's status as imperial residence attracted nobles, clerics, and envoys from across Europe. Despite these achievements, Charles faced challenges. The mid-14th century was marked by the Black Death, which affected Central Europe later and less severely than Western regions but nonetheless disrupted demographic patterns. Administrative records indicate measures to preserve economic continuity. Royal authority helped mitigate instability, though long-term labor shifts reshaped social dynamics. Charles died in 1378, leaving a realm that combined constitutional authority, architectural grandeur, and intellectual vitality. His reign established Prague as a focal point of imperial governance and Central European culture. The integration of legal reform, urban planning, ecclesiastical elevation, and educational foundation created a durable framework for Bohemian prominence. Yet beneath this imperial stability, tensions persisted. Intellectual debates within the university, evolving lay piety, and criticism of ecclesiastical wealth signaled emerging strains. The structures Charles built provided unity and order, but they also created arenas in which reformist ideas could circulate. In the decades following his death, these undercurrents would intensify. The golden age of Charles IV thus represented both culmination and prelude. It marked the height of medieval Bohemian power, when Prague stood as an imperial capital and constitutional pillar of the Holy Roman Empire. At the same time, the institutions he founded would become stages upon which religious and political conflicts unfolded. Beneath the grandeur of cathedrals and bridges, new currents were beginning to move. A university theologian ignited a political crisis. In the early 15th century, the Kingdom of Bohemia stood at a crossroads between imperial stability and religious dissent. The institutions strengthened under Charles IV, most notably the Archbishopric of Prague and Charles University, had elevated the kingdom intellectually and politically. Yet those same institutions also provided space for theological criticism. Within this environment emerged Jan Hus, a master of theology whose sermons and writings would destabilize ecclesiastical authority and reshape Central European politics. Born around 1372 in southern Bohemia, Hus rose through the academic ranks at Charles University. By the early 1400s, he served as rector and as preacher at Bethlehem Chapel in Prague, where sermons were delivered in Czech rather than Latin. This vernacular emphasis broadened his audience beyond clerical elites, allowing theological arguments to reach urban lay communities. The combination of academic authority and popular communication amplified his influence. Huss's critique centered on moral reform of the church. He condemned simony, the sale of ecclesiastical offices, alongside clerical wealth and perceived corruption among bishops and priests. His sermons stressed the primacy of Scripture over institutional hierarchy, arguing that Christ, not the Pope, was the true head of the Church. These arguments echoed the teachings of John Wycliffe, whose works circulated at Prague University. Wycliffe had challenged papal authority and criticized indulgences. Huss adopted and adapted several of these positions, though not all of Wycliffe's more radical doctrines. The intellectual climate of Prague at the time was shaped by national tensions within the university. Faculties were divided among nations, Bohemian, Bavarian, Saxon, and Polish, reflecting the university's international composition. Czech masters increasingly resented the dominance of German-speaking scholars. In 1409, King Wenceslas IV issued the Decree of Kutna Hora, granting greater voting power to the Bohemian nation. Many German masters departed Prague in response, weakening institutional opposition to Huss's reformist circle. The university thereby became more receptive to theological experimentation. At the same time, the Western Schism, 1378 to 1417, fractured papal authority. Rival claimants in Rome and Avignon undermined the unity of the Church. For reform-minded theologians, this division reinforced arguments that ecclesiastical leadership required moral renewal. Huss interpreted the schism as evidence that institutional hierarchy alone could not guarantee spiritual legitimacy. He increasingly framed obedience to Christ's law as superior to obedience to flawed clerical authorities. Conflict intensified in 1412 when indulgences were preached in Prague to finance papal military campaigns. Huss publicly opposed the sale of indulgences, arguing that forgiveness could not be purchased and that papal calls for war contradicted Christian teaching. Public demonstrations followed. Several protesters were executed, deepening popular resentment. Huss's sermons criticized both the indulgence campaign and broader abuses, bringing him into direct confrontation with ecclesiastical authorities. The Archbishop of Prague responded by condemning Wycliffe's writings and placing Bethlehem Chapel under interdict. Huss appealed to higher ecclesiastical authority, eventually invoking the concept of Christ as the ultimate judge. This appeal further alienated him from institutional structures. In 1413, he withdrew from Prague to avoid provoking violence but continued writing treatises that articulated his theology more systematically. His work, De Ecclesia, argued that the true church consisted of the predestined faithful rather than the institutional hierarchy. The broader European church sought resolution of the schism through the Council of Constance, 1414 to 1418. Convened under imperial auspices, the council aimed to restore unity and address heresy. Huss was summoned to appear and defend his teachings. He traveled to Constance in 1414 under a promise of safe conduct issued by King Sigismund of Hungary, brother of Wenceslaus IV and future Holy Roman Emperor. The expectation among his supporters was that he would receive a fair hearing. Instead, Huss was arrested shortly after arrival. Council authorities examined his writings and interrogated him regarding alleged heresies derived from Wycliffe. Transcripts indicate repeated demands that he recant positions deemed erroneous. Huss maintained that he would renounce any doctrine proven contrary to Scripture but refused to abjure teachings he believed consistent with biblical authority. The council declared his views heretical. On July 6, 1415, Huss was formally condemned and executed by burning. Contemporary accounts describe his refusal to retract core principles even in the face of death. His ashes were reportedly cast into the Rhine River to prevent veneration. The execution sent shockwaves through Bohemia. Many perceived it not as legitimate ecclesiastical judgment but as betrayal of safe conduct and suppression of reform. The reaction within Bohemia was immediate and political. Nobles issued formal protests to the council, defending Huss's honor and asserting the kingdom's autonomy in religious matters. These letters, preserved in diplomatic collections, reveal that dissatisfaction extended beyond university circles into segments of the aristocracy. Huss's death transformed theological debate into a matter of national and political identity. Urban populations also mobilized. Sermons memorialized Huss as a martyr for truth. The Bethlehem Chapel became a focal point for reformist sentiment. Lay communities began demanding communion under both kinds, bread and wine, for the laity, a practice known as utriquism. This demand symbolized equality of believers before God and rejection of clerical exclusivity. The chalice emerged as a visual emblem of reform. Sigismund's role further complicated matters. As a participant in the Council of Constance and heir to the Bohemian throne, he was viewed with suspicion. Many Bohemians blamed him for failing to protect Huss despite the safe conduct guarantee. Political distrust intertwined with religious grievance, creating a volatile environment. Royal authority weakened as reformist preachers gained influence in Prague and beyond. The execution of Huss did not immediately produce armed conflict, but it dismantled the possibility of reconciliation within existing ecclesiastical structures. Reformers increasingly organized around shared grievances, while conservative clergy sought suppression. University debates spilled into parish churches and town squares. Theological language became a vehicle for broader social critique, including criticism of wealth disparities and clerical privilege. In the years following 1415, reformist factions diversified. Some advocated moderate changes within church structure. Others adopted more radical positions questioning property rights and hierarchy altogether. The intellectual origins of these movements lay in Huss's insistence on scriptural authority and moral reform. Yet once institutional mediation collapsed, interpretation diversified rapidly. Bohemia's geopolitical position within the Holy Roman Empire added another dimension. Imperial authorities regarded persistent dissent as threat to unity. Papal and imperial efforts to enforce orthodoxy intensified perceptions of external interference. Reform thus assumed both spiritual and political significance. Defense of doctrinal conscience and defense of regional autonomy. The legacy of Jan Hus therefore extended beyond his theological treatises. His execution transformed a university-based critique into a mass movement. The moral authority derived from perceived martyrdom proved powerful. Chronicles and later narratives depicted him as witness to truth against corruption. While historical evaluation must distinguish legend from documentation, the mobilizing effect of his death is indisputable. By 1419, tensions escalated dramatically in Prague, culminating in acts of violence against municipal officials aligned with anti-reform factions. The defenestration of Prague signaled transition from protest to uprising. The boundaries between religious reform and political rebellion blurred. Authority fragmented, and factions armed themselves in defense of competing visions of Christian order. Thus, the career and death of Jan Hus marked a decisive turning point in Bohemian history. What began as ecclesiastical critique evolved into a challenge to imperial and papal authority. Institutional reforms envisioned within academic debate now intersected with popular mobilization and aristocratic protest. The structures built during the Golden Age became arenas of confrontation rather than unity. His execution led directly to armed religious conflict. Bohemia became the epicenter of Europe's first large-scale Reformation conflict. The execution of Jan Hus in 1415 did not merely silence a theologian. It destabilized the political and religious equilibrium of Central Europe. By 1419, escalating tensions between reformist factions and royal authorities erupted into open violence. What followed between 1419 and 1436, known collectively as the Hussite Wars, represented a sustained confrontation between Bohemian reformers and a series of imperial-backed crusades. These conflicts combined theological conviction, social unrest, and military innovation in unprecedented ways. The immediate catalyst was the first defenestration of Prague in July 1419. Radical reformers, led by preacher Jan Zalivsky, marched on Prague's new town hall demanding the release of Hussite prisoners. When officials refused, they were thrown from the windows and killed. King Wenceslas IV died shortly thereafter, and the Bohemian throne passed nominally to Sigismund of Luxembourg. To many reformers, Sigismund embodied betrayal, associated with the Council of Constance and Huss's execution. His claim to the throne was widely rejected within reformist regions. Bohemian society fractured into distinct Hussite factions. The moderate Utraquists sought communion under both kinds and limited reform within existing social structures. The more radical Taborites, centered in the newly founded town of Tabor, advocated deeper transformation, including communal religious practices and rejection of certain traditional hierarchies. Despite doctrinal differences, these groups initially united against external intervention. In response to unrest, Pope Martin V proclaimed a crusade against the Hussites in 1420. Imperial and papal forces, joined by German and Hungarian contingents, marched into Bohemia. The expectation among crusading leaders was swift suppression of what they regarded as heresy. Instead, they encountered organized resistance shaped by innovative tactics under commanders such as Jan Žižka. Žižka, a veteran of earlier conflicts and reportedly blind in one eye even before the wars began, proved a formidable strategist. He reorganized largely non-professional forces, town militias, peasants, and lesser nobles, into disciplined units. His most notable tactical innovation was the use of Wagenburg, or wagon forts. Heavy wagons were chained together to create mobile defensive formations equipped with handguns, crossbows, and small cannon. These formations neutralized cavalry charges, which had dominated medieval warfare. At the Battle of Witkov Hill in 1420, Hussite forces successfully defended Prague against a crusading army led by Sigismund. The wagon fortifications and coordinated use of early firearms disrupted traditional nightly assaults. The victory bolstered morale and demonstrated that reformist forces could withstand imperial coalitions. Subsequent crusades in 1421 and 1422 similarly failed to achieve decisive victory. The military structure of the Hussites reflected ideological cohesion. Soldiers sang hymns such as Taz Jsu Bozi Bajavnasai, Ye who are warriors of God, before battle, reinforcing the perception of divine mission. Religious conviction fused with tactical discipline. Artillery and firearms, though primitive, were deployed systematically, making Hussite armies among the most technologically adaptive forces of the period. Internal divisions, however, persisted. After Ziska's death in 1424, leadership fragmented. The Taborites pursued more radical reforms, sometimes clashing with moderate Utraquists. Campaigns extended beyond Bohemia into neighboring regions, including Moravia, Silesia, and parts of Austria and Saxony. These expeditions, sometimes termed Spanel Jizdi, beautiful rides, sought both military advantage and ideological expansion. Neighboring territories experienced raids that reinforced external perceptions of Hussite militancy. Imperial forces launched multiple additional crusades throughout the 1420s. Despite numerical superiority, crusading armies struggled against disciplined Hussite formations and unfamiliar tactics. At the Battle of Damazlis in 1431, crusading troops reportedly retreated prematurely upon hearing approaching Hussite forces singing battle hymns. Whether embellished or not, contemporary sources agree that the crusade collapsed without decisive engagement, underscoring Hussite psychological and tactical strength. The prolonged conflict transformed Bohemia's political structure. Traditional feudal hierarchies weakened as military leadership shifted toward commanders chosen for competence rather than birth alone. Towns fortified themselves and assumed greater administrative autonomy. Noble factions aligned strategically with either moderate or radical reformers, creating fluid alliances. Authority no longer flowed unambiguously from monarch to subject. Legitimacy became contingent upon confessional alignment. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict intensified after repeated military failures. The Council of Basel, 1431 to 1449, convened to address church reform and reconcile with the Hussites, initiated negotiations. Moderate Utraquists entered discussions, seeking formal recognition of communion under both kinds. The radicals remained skeptical, but war fatigue and economic disruption encouraged compromise among broader segments of society. The resulting agreement, known as the Compacts of Basel, 1436, granted limited concessions. Utraquists were permitted to receive the Eucharist in both kinds, and certain ecclesiastical reforms were acknowledged within Bohemia. In exchange, moderate Hussites recognized Sigismund as King of Bohemia. Though not satisfying radical factions entirely, the compacts ended large-scale hostilities and integrated Bohemia into a conditional settlement with the broader church. The wars had lasting consequences. Militarily, they demonstrated the declining dominance of heavy cavalry and the rising significance of infantry, firearms, and field fortifications. Socially, they elevated urban and lesser noble influence. Religiously, they established Bohemia as a region of tolerated heterodoxy decades before the Protestant Reformation. The Utraquist Church operated semi-independently within a Catholic framework, representing a negotiated pluralism rare in medieval Europe. Demographically and economically, the conflict imposed significant strain. Towns suffered sieges, trade routes were disrupted, agricultural production fluctuated. Yet Bohemia did not collapse into permanent fragmentation. Instead, the negotiated settlement preserved territorial integrity while institutionalizing religious distinction. The kingdom emerged altered but not extinguished. The symbolic resonance of the Hussite wars extended beyond Bohemia. Reformers in later centuries would cite Huss and the Hussites as precursors to broader movements challenging ecclesiastical authority. While the 15th century conflict remained regionally contained, its theological arguments anticipated debates that would resurface in the 16th century. By 1436, the Compacts of Basel had curtailed the era of crusades against Bohemia. Sigismund's recognition as king marked restoration of dynastic continuity, albeit under new religious conditions. The monarchy now rested on negotiated authority rather than uncontested succession. The relationship between ruler, nobility, towns, and clergy had been recalibrated through war. Religious division reshaped political legitimacy. A battlefield in Hungary redirected Bohemia's political destiny. The catastrophic defeat of King Louis II of Hungary and Bohemia at the Battle of Mohacs on August 29, 1526 reshaped Central European power structures. Louis II, the last Jagiellonian monarch in the male line, perished in combat against Ottoman forces, leaving the thrones of Bohemia and Hungary vacant. The resulting succession crisis brought the House of Habsburg dynasty into direct control of Bohemia, initiating a new era of dynastic rule that would persist for centuries. The Bohemian estates acted decisively to secure stability. Within weeks of Mohacs, the Czech Diet convened in Prague to elect a successor. Ferdinand I, brother of Emperor Charles V, was chosen as king. Ferdinand's claim rested on dynastic marriage ties and imperial authority, which the estates accepted to prevent civil conflict and protect the kingdom from external threats. The election illustrates the combined influence of legal dynastic claims and pragmatic consideration by local nobility. Ferdinand I's accession formalized Bohemia's integration into a broader composite monarchy. Unlike previous kings whose primary concerns had been regional consolidation, the Habsburgs pursued governance across multiple territories, including Austria, Hungary, and eventually Spain and the Low Countries. Bohemia retained distinct institutions, its diet, legal codices, and municipal structures, but operated increasingly within a trans-regional political framework directed from Vienna. Royal appointments now reflected both local interests and dynastic priorities, ensuring loyalty while embedding Bohemia within the Habsburg sphere. Administrative consolidation occurred through coordinated oversight of the crown lands. Ferdinand delegated authority to governors and castellans who managed taxation, defense, and judicial matters. Contemporary records indicate that officials maintained detailed registers of towns, mining operations, and landholdings. Such documentation enabled integration into broader Habsburg fiscal and military systems, ensuring that Bohemia's resources supported composite monarchy objectives while retaining local functionality. Economically, Bohemia benefited from continuity of mining and urban development established under the Luxembourgs. Kutna Hora and other silver-producing regions contributed to both royal revenue and transregional trade. Habsburg administration codified mining privileges and standardized taxation, linking Bohemian fiscal output to broader imperial budgets. Coinage reforms maintained Prague groschen circulation, facilitating economic stability despite political transition. Military considerations were central to Habsburg strategy. The kingdom's geographic position, bordering Saxony, Poland, and Moravia, required fortification against both Ottoman incursions and internal unrest. Castle garrisons were strengthened, and troops were stationed at strategic passes in the Sudetes and Bohemian forest. The integration of Bohemian forces into Habsburg defense plans illustrates the dual role of the kingdom as both autonomous polity and constituent part of imperial security architecture. Religious dynamics complicated the transition. Bohemia remained divided between Utraquist and Catholic populations, and the Habsburgs sought to assert confessional conformity while respecting pragmatic realities. Ferdinand emphasized Catholic ritual and ecclesiastical hierarchy, appointing bishops aligned with Vienna. Simultaneously, he tolerated certain Utraquist practices to prevent immediate rebellion. These policies reflect a careful balance between central authority and local negotiation, which characterized early Habsburg governance. Diplomatically, the Habsburg accession positioned Bohemia within wider European networks. Ferdinand leveraged dynastic marriage alliances to secure recognition from neighboring powers and consolidate territorial claims. Letters, charters, and treaties from the period demonstrate negotiation with Poland, Saxony, and Hungary to affirm borders, mutual defense, and trade agreements. Bohemia's role shifted from regional kingdom to a critical node in Habsburg diplomatic strategy. The succession also prompted legal adaptations. Bohemian estates maintained privileges codified in earlier charters, but the monarchy gradually expanded oversight in judicial and fiscal matters. The integration process involved harmonizing Bohemian law with broader Habsburg administrative norms without dismantling local autonomy. Legal records from the early 16th century indicate both continuity and incremental centralization, reflecting the tension inherent in composite monarchy. Nobility adjusted to new conditions with varying success. Prominent Bohemian families, some aligned with previous dynasties, others newly elevated, negotiated offices and rights under Habsburg rule. The monarchy relied on these elites for local governance, military levies, and revenue collection, embedding them within the composite political system. Resistance remained limited initially, as the states prioritized continuity and protection against external threats, particularly Ottoman expansion. The dynastic transition also influenced culture and education. Habsburg patronage supported clerical institutions, universities, and courtly networks, promoting Latin literacy, administrative competence, and doctrinal conformity. While Charles University continued as a center of learning, curricula increasingly reflected Habsburg priorities, including preparation of administrators and clerics aligned with imperial policy. The kingdom's intellectual infrastructure thus complemented its political integration. By 1526, Bohemia had effectively entered a new political era. The kingdom retained institutional structures but operated within a trans-regional Habsburg monarchy. Strategic governance, military oversight, economic integration, and dynastic legitimacy all underpinned the transition. Bohemia's autonomy persisted in legal and municipal terms, yet its broader orientation now served imperial objectives rather than solely regional consolidation. Confessional division, however, would soon intensify under Habsburg rule. Utriquist communities viewed centralized Catholic oversight with suspicion, while conservative clergy sought to reassert influence. Religious tensions intersected with noble politics, urban governance, and imperial ambitions, creating conditions for future conflict. The composite monarchy depended upon balancing local tradition with dynastic consolidation, a challenge that would dominate Bohemia's subsequent history. Religious division intensified under Habsburg rule. Two officials thrown from a window ignited continental war. In May 1618, tensions between Bohemian Protestant estates and Habsburg authorities reached a breaking point. The immediate trigger was the Second Defenestration of Prague, when representatives of the king's administration, Catholic governors, were hurled from a castle window by radical Protestant nobles. Remarkably, they survived the fall, yet the act symbolized a decisive rejection of imperial authority. This event ignited the 30 Years' War, a multifaceted struggle that would engulf much of Central Europe for 3 decades. Bohemian estates had long experienced tension under Habsburg rule. Following the dynastic transition of 1526, confessional differences persisted, with Utriquist and Lutheran populations coexisting uneasily with a Catholic monarchy. The late 16th and early 17th centuries saw increasing efforts by Habsburg rulers, particularly Ferdinand II, to impose uniform Catholic practice and limit Protestant rights guaranteed under prior compacts. Estates resisted measures such as the closure of Protestant chapels and restrictions on preaching. Religious grievances thus merged with concerns over local autonomy and estate privileges. The Revolt of 1618 formalized an independent Bohemian government. Estates convened a provisional assembly that assumed executive and military authority, appointing commanders and organizing defenses. They sought to protect religious freedoms and maintain political influence over taxation, military levies, and administration. Correspondence from the period emphasizes their intent to uphold ancient rights while resisting perceived encroachment by the monarchy. The early phase of conflict combined siege warfare, localized skirmishes, and diplomatic maneuvering. Protestant forces mobilized within Bohemian towns and fortresses, while Catholic forces loyal to Ferdinand II prepared to intervene from imperial and allied territories. Both sides sought alliances with neighboring powers. Protestant estates courted support from the Palatinate and Saxony, while Ferdinand appealed to Bavaria, Spain, and other Catholic principalities. The regional dimensions of the revolt foreshadowed the broader European scope of the impending war. By 1620, imperial forces under General Count of Tilly confronted the Bohemian army at the Battle of White Mountain. Contemporary sources report that the Bohemian force, composed of estate levies and mercenary units, faced organizational and tactical disadvantages. The Catholic army, disciplined and equipped with coordinated artillery and cavalry, decisively defeated the Protestant troops. Casualties were substantial, and survivors were dispersed or executed in the aftermath. This single engagement effectively ended Bohemian military resistance and reasserted Habsburg dominance. The consequences for political autonomy were immediate. The Bohemian crown passed firmly into Habsburg hands, with estates stripped of executive powers and subject to increased central oversight. Estates' assemblies were subordinated to imperial directives, and noble privileges were curtailed where resistance had been strongest. Legal codifications enforced loyalty to the monarchy and restricted confessional self-determination. Recatholicization followed rapidly. Protestant clergy were expelled or converted, churches and chapels reassigned to Catholic orders, and educational institutions brought under ecclesiastical supervision. Contemporary accounts indicate that Jesuit colleges played a leading role in enforcing doctrinal conformity. Lay populations faced pressure to conform through social, legal, and economic incentives. This systematic religious transformation reshaped the kingdom's confessional landscape, aligning it closely with Habsburg priorities. The defeat also had demographic and economic effects. Many Protestant nobles and intellectuals emigrated, reducing the influence of traditional Bohemian leadership. Urban elites were replaced or subordinated, and towns faced new administrative oversight. Agriculture and commerce continued under Habsburg supervision, but a state's capacity for independent decision-making was curtailed. The combination of political and religious centralization marked a decisive end to the semi-autonomous Bohemian polity that had persisted since the Hussite era. Internationally, the revolt and its suppression intensified continental conflict. The Bohemian theater became the initial stage of the 30 Years' War, drawing in armies and resources from the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, the Dutch Republic, France, and Sweden over subsequent decades. Bohemia's position as a Central European kingdom meant that local disturbances had broad geopolitical ramifications, linking confessional struggle to dynastic and territorial ambitions. By the early 1620s, Bohemia had been effectively reintegrated into Habsburg control. The combination of military defeat, loss of estate privileges, and enforced Catholic conformity marked the end of meaningful political autonomy. The kingdom's institutions remained formally intact but operated under strict imperial oversight, signaling a new phase in Bohemian governance characterized by centralized authority and confessional uniformity. Religious and political consolidation following the Battle of White Mountain established conditions for Habsburg dominance that persisted throughout the 17th century. Protestant expression was curtailed, nobility and urban leadership were subordinated, and Bohemia became a secure base for imperial policy. The legacy of the revolt thus shaped both internal governance and Bohemia's role in European power politics. Defeat was followed by cultural reconstruction. The aftermath of the 30 Years' War left Bohemia politically subdued and religiously homogenized. The Habsburg monarchy seized this opportunity to consolidate authority, and cultural initiatives became instruments of centralization. The Jesuits, invited to Prague in the early 1620s, played a pivotal role in shaping education, religion, and urban life. The order established colleges and seminaries that trained clergy and administrators loyal to imperial and Catholic norms. Through structured curricula emphasizing theology, philosophy, and the humanities, Jesuit education reinforced the monarchy's ideological objectives while cultivating an educated elite aligned with Vienna. Urban architecture reflected similar priorities. Baroque style became dominant in Prague and other major towns, both symbolizing and facilitating Habsburg control. Churches, palaces, and public buildings were redesigned or newly constructed with grandeur intended to impress and assert authority. Notable examples include the Church of St. Nicholas in Malá and extensive modifications to Prague Castle, which combined ceremonial function with visual dominance over the cityscape. These projects were supported by imperial funding and local contributions, embedding centralized influence in both material and symbolic dimensions. Language policy reinforced integration. German increasingly became the language of administration, legal proceedings, and higher education. While Czech persisted among the populace, The shift in official language signaled alignment with imperial bureaucratic norms. Records from municipal councils, courts, and imperial correspondence illustrate systematic adoption of German for governance, correspondence, and record-keeping. This linguistic transformation facilitated coordination across Habsburg territories and standardized administrative practice. Religious life was similarly reshaped. Catholic ritual and the liturgical calendar were rigorously enforced, with Jesuit preaching and parish oversight ensuring compliance. Public ceremonies and processions were employed to project authority and celebrate dynastic legitimacy. Art and sculpture reinforced doctrinal messaging, portraying saints, Marian imagery, and imperial symbolism. This cultural programming strengthened both ideological cohesion and social discipline, linking aesthetic expression directly to state objectives. The transformation extended to education beyond clergy. Jesuit schools admitted children of the nobility and urban elites, embedding loyalty to Habsburg governance within socialization from an early age. Curricular emphasis on rhetoric, logic, and ethics complemented instruction in theology, creating a cadre capable of managing municipal administration, legal affairs, and diplomatic responsibilities. The educational network thus became a mechanism of long-term integration, aligning human capital with centralized authority. Economically, the Reconstruction period leveraged urban redevelopment. Baroque planning improved traffic, markets, and fortifications, facilitating trade and municipal management. Investments in public works, including bridges and water management, reinforced Habsburg control while demonstrating practical benefits of centralized governance. These initiatives complemented religious and linguistic policies, forming a coherent program of political-cultural integration. Cultural consolidation also encompassed the visual arts. Painting, sculpture, and decorative arts were employed to articulate both spiritual and dynastic narratives. Court patronage fostered artists who combined Italian and Central European Baroque styles, producing altarpieces, ceiling frescoes, and ceremonial objects that reinforced the monarchy's ideological and religious objectives. Public art, installed in prominent civic spaces, served as both inspiration and reminder of imperial authority. By the mid-17th century, Prague and other Bohemian towns had undergone extensive transformation. Baroque aesthetics, Jesuit education, and German language administration collectively embedded Habsburg power into daily life. While these initiatives reflected aesthetic and intellectual sophistication, their primary function was political consolidation, demonstrating how cultural policy could reinforce imperial integration. Economic restructuring followed political subordination. In the decades following the 30 Years' War, Bohemia's economy underwent significant realignment under Habsburg centralization. Agricultural production, already oriented toward staple crops and local markets, experienced intensified regulation. Serfdom was reinforced, with peasants bound more rigorously to noble estates. Estate records and manorial surveys from the mid-17th century document increased corvée labor, mandatory tithes, and legal restrictions on mobility. This consolidation of agrarian control ensured predictable revenue flows for both landowners and the monarchy while anchoring rural populations within hierarchical structures. Parallel to agrarian intensification, proto-industrial activity began to emerge. Bohemia possessed natural resources, including timber, ore, and watercourses suitable for mechanized mills. Towns such as Jablanek and Kamenis nad Lipu developed textile production, employing cottage-based weaving and dyeing networks. Glassmaking, already a regional specialty, expanded under both guild regulation and royal patronage. Archaeological evidence demonstrates centralized workshops equipped with furnaces and kilns, indicating investments that combined artisanal skill with nascent industrial organization. Urban centers adapted to these shifts by integrating production, trade, and administrative oversight. Town charters required guild membership for skilled craftsmen, enforcing quality and standardizing output. Markets and fairs coordinated the distribution of textiles, glassware, and processed agricultural products. Economic documentation, including tax rolls and export records, indicates that Bohemian towns supplied both domestic and imperial markets, linking local production to the broader Habsburg economy. Monetary policy complemented economic restructuring. Prague and other mints continued issuing coinage, regulating weights and purity to stabilize trade. Habsburg authorities used revenue from urban and rural production to finance military garrisons, bureaucratic administration, and reconstruction projects. This integration of fiscal, agrarian, and proto-industrial systems illustrates how economic realignment reinforced political and social hierarchies established after 1620. Transportation infrastructure also played a role. River networks, particularly the Vltava, were utilized for moving raw materials and finished goods. Bridges, canals, and maintained roadways facilitated connections between rural estates, urban centers, and imperial markets. The state's involvement in maintaining these routes reflects a deliberate strategy to centralize control over economic flows while enhancing regional integration. Labor organization reflected dual pressures: noble oversight and emerging market demands. While serfdom constrained mobility and dictated labor obligations, guilds and family-based workshops introduced elements of skill specialization and productivity incentives. These overlapping structures highlight the complex interaction between coercion and economic innovation in early modern Bohemia. By the late 17th century, Bohemian production patterns were closely linked to imperial priorities. Agricultural surpluses supported urban centers and military logistics, while textiles and glassware contributed to both domestic consumption and export trade. Economic growth was uneven, concentrated in resource-rich areas and urban hubs, but sufficient to sustain the fiscal demands of the monarchy. Imperial reforms sought to modernize without decentralizing. The reign of Emperor Joseph II, 1765 to 1790, marked a period of systematic Enlightenment-inspired reforms across the Habsburg domains, including Bohemia. Joseph pursued rationalized administration, legal codification, and social modernization with the objective of strengthening central authority while enhancing efficiency. These policies directly targeted the institutional remnants of feudal and ecclesiastical power, reflecting both ideological commitment to enlightened governance and practical concerns over fiscal and military stability. Among the most significant measures was the Patent of 1781, which effectively abolished serfdom throughout the Habsburg lands. Peasants were granted personal freedom and the right to inherit and transfer property, although obligations to landowners persisted in modified forms. Estate records and imperial edicts detail the procedural mechanisms for emancipation, including registration of holdings and obligations to continue certain corvée services temporarily. By reducing compulsory labor, the reform aimed to incentivize productivity and integrate rural populations more effectively into a monetized economy. Administrative centralization accompanied social reforms. Joseph implemented standardized bureaucratic structures, replacing overlapping jurisdictions with hierarchically organized offices accountable to Vienna. Nobles' legal privileges were curtailed. They were now subject to state law, taxation, and military conscription requirements. Municipal administration in Prague and other towns was regulated through codified charters, emphasizing procedural uniformity and accountability. These changes strengthened imperial oversight while reducing local arbitrariness. Legal and judicial reforms reinforced rational governance. Criminal and civil codes were standardized, courts were reorganized to ensure professionalized adjudication, and torture as a judicial instrument was limited or abolished. The reforms reflect Enlightenment principles of codified law, procedural transparency, and uniform application, contributing to a perception of impartial authority while consolidating centralized power. Education and language policy were also affected. State-supported schools promoted literacy, technical skills, and loyalty to the monarchy. German increasingly dominated official instruction, though Czech language initiatives persisted in primary education. The promotion of German as the administrative and cultural lingua franca facilitated cohesion within the multi-ethnic Habsburg monarchy while marginalizing local vernaculars in elite circles. Religious policy complemented these secular reforms. Joseph reduced ecclesiastical influence over education, land management, and judicial matters. Monastic orders not engaged in social services were suppressed, and their assets redirected to secular administration or charitable projects. Parish structures were standardized, and toleration was extended to Protestant and Orthodox minorities within limits. These measures curtailed clerical autonomy integrated church resources into state structures, and reinforced the principle of central oversight. Economic initiatives were linked to both social and administrative reforms. Freed peasant labor enabled more flexible agricultural production, while incentives were provided for proto-industrial activity, including textiles, mining, and crafts. Imperial authorities regulated trade and standardized measurements and coinage, facilitating broader market integration. Surveys and censuses were conducted to optimize resource allocation and taxation, reflecting the technocratic orientation of Josephine governance. Despite the intent to modernize without decentralization, reforms had unintended social and political effects. The expansion of education, legal rationalization, and enhanced mobility among the lower classes contributed to the emergence of a more politically aware and literate population. Urban and rural communities began to articulate grievances and aspirations with reference to both rights and national identity, often framing these within the context of Bohemian language and history. Bohemia, with its historical experience of autonomy, estates privileges, and distinct religious traditions, responded to Josephine reforms with a combination of adaptation and resistance. Nobles negotiated the implementation of serfdom abolition, urban elites leveraged administrative changes to enhance municipal authority, and emerging intellectuals used educational opportunities to develop Czech language scholarship. Contemporary writings, periodicals, and correspondence reveal increasing attention to historical identity, cultural distinctiveness, and civic responsibility. The administrative rationalization also facilitated communication and coordination among reform-minded elites. By centralizing archives, standardizing documentation, and codifying procedures, imperial policies inadvertently provided the tools for intellectual and cultural movements. Historians, educators, and writers utilized the state infrastructure to promote knowledge of Bohemian history, language, and legal tradition, fostering collective awareness of a distinct national trajectory. By the end of Joseph II's reign in 1790, Bohemia had undergone substantive transformation. Serfdom was abolished, noble privileges curtailed, bureaucratic authority was rationalized, and educational and religious institutions were reorganized. These measures enhanced imperial control, modernized economic and social structures, and established new norms for governance. Language became the vehicle of political identity. The 19th century witnessed the emergence of the Czech national revival, a movement aimed at restoring the Czech language, literature, and historical consciousness within Bohemia. After centuries of German-dominated administration and elite culture, Czech intellectuals and scholars initiated systematic efforts to codify, preserve, and promote the vernacular. The revival combined linguistic reform, historical research, and literary production to reconstruct a shared cultural identity and articulate a distinct national narrative. Central figures included Joseph Dobrovský, who laid the foundations of modern Czech linguistics, and František Palický, whose historiography emphasized Bohemia's independent political and cultural legacy. Dobrovsky's grammatical and philological studies standardized spelling and usage, enabling literary production and scholarly communication in Czech. Palický's multi-volume History of the Czech Nation in Bohemia and Moravia, 1836 to 1865, traced political continuity, emphasizing the kingdom's historical sovereignty, institutions, and cultural achievements. Together, their work provided intellectual legitimacy for national consciousness within a Habsburg framework. The revival extended into literary and journalistic activity. Czech-language newspapers, journals, and literary societies proliferated in Prague and provincial towns. Writers and poets composed works that celebrated historical heroes, folklore, and regional identity. Periodicals provided forums for debate on language standardization, education, and cultural preservation. Civic engagement grew alongside literary production, linking linguistic proficiency to participation in public and municipal life. Educational initiatives reinforced linguistic revival. Czech language instruction expanded in schools and universities, complementing German language curricula imposed under Habsburg administration. Private societies established reading rooms and libraries, disseminating texts in the vernacular. The standardization of grammar and orthography facilitated broader literacy and enabled coordination across urban and rural populations. In these ways, language became both a tool for cultural continuity and a practical instrument of social mobilization. Historical research played a critical role in national consciousness. Paleki and contemporaries emphasized Bohemia's medieval institutions, dynastic history, and legal traditions, demonstrating continuity despite centuries of Habsburg oversight. Manuscripts, charters, and chronicles were collected, edited, and published, providing primary evidence for civic pride and scholarly study. The historical narrative highlighted Bohemia's contributions to Central European politics, jurisprudence, and culture, reinforcing claims to political distinctiveness within the empire. The movement also engaged with folk culture and music. Collecting and publishing traditional songs, tales, and proverbs served both scholarly and nationalistic purposes. Folklore was analyzed as evidence of enduring cultural identity and as a repository of values, ethics, and linguistic heritage. Music festivals and theatrical performances further promoted Czech language and aesthetics, integrating cultural revival into daily life. Urban centers were key nodes in this movement. Prague, with its universities, printing presses, and civic institutions, functioned as the intellectual hub. Provincial towns contributed through local societies and publications, ensuring dissemination of cultural and linguistic revival beyond the capital. Networks of correspondence and travel among scholars and writers facilitated coordination and standardization across regions. The national revival intersected with political developments. While Habsburg administration maintained centralized authority, growing Czech cultural confidence created conditions for advocating civil rights, representation, and educational reform. Czech language proficiency became a marker of identity within bureaucratic and civic spheres, enabling gradual assertion of communal interests without directly challenging imperial legitimacy. Civic organizations and cultural societies thus became incubators for nascent political participation. By the mid-19th century, the Czech national revival had re-established a literary and scholarly tradition in Czech, reinforcing historical awareness and cultural cohesion. Newspapers, journals, historical studies, and educational initiatives had cultivated a literate, culturally conscious population prepared to engage with civic and political processes. The movement demonstrated how language and scholarship could serve as instruments of collective identity within a multi-ethnic empire. National consciousness developed through these channels would later influence modern state formation. Civic awareness, historical understanding, and cultural pride created the intellectual and social infrastructure for political movements in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Language, literature, and historiography established continuity with Bohemian political traditions, providing legitimacy for claims to autonomy and eventual nationhood within Central Europe. Industrial growth intensified political expectations. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Bohemia emerged as one of the most industrialized regions of Austria-Hungary. The kingdom's rich deposits of coal, lignite, and metal ores, combined with a skilled labor force, fostered rapid expansion of manufacturing, textiles, and machinery production. Urban centers such as Prague, Brno, and Plzeň became hubs for factories, workshops, and transport networks, including railroads connecting Bohemia to Vienna, Saxony, and beyond. Census data and economic reports from the period indicate that industrial employment grew significantly, drawing rural populations into urban labor markets and altering traditional social structures. Economic modernization coincided with rising political consciousness among the Czech population. Industrial workers, urban professionals, and the intelligentsia began organizing within emerging political parties. Nationalist movements emphasized cultural autonomy, Czech language education, and representation within the imperial parliament, while liberal and social democratic parties advocated labor rights, suffrage expansion, and municipal reforms. Parliamentary elections after the 1867 Austro-Hungarian Compromise reflected growing demands for federal restructuring, with Czech representatives frequently pressing for greater administrative and fiscal autonomy within the dual monarchy framework. Industrialization also facilitated new forms of communication and civic engagement. Newspapers, journals, and pamphlets circulated widely, addressing issues ranging from labor conditions to national identity. Literacy rates had increased considerably since the 19th century national revival, allowing newspapers to reach urban workers and provincial elites alike. Political clubs, trade associations, and cultural societies provided forums for discussion and mobilization, linking economic change with organized political action. The economic transformation brought both opportunities and challenges. Factory employment provided wages and upward mobility for some, yet working conditions were often harsh, with long hours, minimal safety measures, and limited social protections. Strikes and labor disputes became increasingly common, illustrating tensions between industrial growth and social regulation. Municipal and imperial authorities responded with regulation, policing, and, occasionally, negotiation, reflecting the complexity of managing a rapidly modernizing economy within a multi-ethnic empire. Nationalist discourse intertwined with economic and social concerns. Czech political leaders framed industrial and educational advancement as evidence of the nation's capacity for self-governance. Historical references to Bohemian statehood, linguistic revival, and cultural heritage underpinned demands for administrative recognition and equitable participation in imperial decision-making. Parliamentary debates, political manifestos, and cultural publications demonstrate the combination of historical argumentation and contemporary economic rationale in shaping political expectations. Infrastructure developments complemented industrialization. Expansion of rail networks, urban tram systems, and river transport enhanced connectivity between industrial centers, raw material sources, and export markets. Investment in telecommunications and postal systems further facilitated coordination of commercial and political activity. These improvements strengthened regional integration, enabling both economic growth and the mobilization of civic organizations advocating reform. By the early 20th century, Bohemia had become a center of technical expertise and manufacturing within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Industrial production, urbanization, and infrastructural development created a sophisticated economic and administrative environment, while social stratification and occupational specialization fostered a politically engaged citizenry. Economic prosperity, coupled with historical consciousness, heightened expectations for autonomy and reform among Czech elites and working populations alike. Political movements increasingly framed industrial achievement as justification for national and federal rights. Czech parties demanded recognition of cultural and linguistic distinctiveness, equitable representation in parliament, and the ability to manage local governance. Proposals for federal restructuring, including regional legislative assemblies, reflected broader trends within multi-ethnic empires seeking to reconcile central authority with regional identities. Despite imperial resistance, these demands gained traction in public discourse and legislative arenas. Economic modernization also affected rural areas. Mechanized agriculture, improved transportation, and market integration influenced land tenure, production strategies, and demographic patterns. Rural labor migration to urban centers contributed to urban workforce expansion while simultaneously spreading nationalist ideas into provincial communities. Agricultural societies, cooperative movements, and local councils engaged with imperial policies, creating networks that linked economic and political transformation across Bohemia. The period leading up to World War I saw Bohemian society increasingly polarized along both national and class lines. Industrial workers, middle-class professionals, and peasant communities each articulated distinct but overlapping interests. Czech national identity intersected with social and economic grievances, creating a dynamic environment in which industrialization directly fueled political organization and activism. Public demonstrations, petitions, and assembly debates reveal the active engagement of civil society in shaping the trajectory of the kingdom. By 1914, Bohemia had developed both the economic capacity and political consciousness to assert demands for autonomy within Austria-Hungary. Industrial prosperity, urbanization, and educated civic participation had generated expectations for reform, but these ambitions were constrained by the complex ethnic composition of the empire and the conservative policies of Vienna. The outbreak of war would soon disrupt these processes, as mobilization and military priorities superseded domestic reform, exposing the fragility of the imperial system. Imperial collapse redefined Central Europe. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 placed extraordinary strain on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, of which Bohemia was a central economic and industrial region. Mobilization absorbed labor, disrupted trade, and redirected resources to military production. Census and economic reports document labor shortages in factories and mines, declines in agricultural output, and inflation that eroded urban and rural purchasing power. The empire's multi-ethnic composition exacerbated these pressures, as nationalist aspirations among Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, and other groups challenged centralized authority and complicated military recruitment. Military defeats on the Eastern and Italian fronts further weakened imperial credibility. Reports from 1915 to 1917 indicate declining morale among troops, logistical failures, and political disputes within Vienna. Bohemian soldiers, conscripted into imperial units, increasingly identified with their national community rather than with the Habsburg monarchy. Letters, diaries, and newspapers reveal growing dissatisfaction and the spread of nationalist sentiment among both civilians and servicemen. Parallel to battlefield pressures, political movements in Bohemia intensified. Czech leaders had long articulated demands for autonomy, cultural recognition, and federal reform. Organizations such as the Mafia Network, student associations, and municipal councils coordinated advocacy for self-determination. By 1917, correspondence between Czech exiles and domestic leaders reflected strategic planning for independence, emphasizing diplomatic recognition by the Allied powers and coordination with Slovak representatives. The final collapse accelerated in 1918. The Central Powers' military position deteriorated, domestic unrest increased, and the imperial government proved incapable of managing simultaneous economic, political, and social crises. Bohemian representatives seized this opportunity to act decisively. On October 28, 1918, the Czechoslovak National Council, led by Tomáš Garriga Masaryk, proclaimed the independence of Czechoslovakia. The declaration established a provisional government, asserting continuity with historic Bohemian governance, while incorporating Slovak territories into a unified national framework. The proclamation drew on multiple forms of legitimacy. Historical precedent, including Bohemia's medieval autonomy, the administrative structures maintained under Habsburg rule, and the cultural identity strengthened during the Czech national revival, provided symbolic and practical authority. Masaryk and his associates emphasized both legal continuity and modern national principles, positioning Czechoslovakia as a sovereign successor to Bohemia's historical polity. International recognition followed quickly. The Allied powers, negotiating post-war settlements, acknowledged Czechoslovakia as an independent state, incorporating it into broader arrangements for Central Europe. Treaties such as Saint-Germain-en-Laye, 1919, formalized territorial boundaries, sovereignty, and the rights of minorities, ensuring both legal and diplomatic legitimacy for the new nation. These agreements underscored the transformation of Bohemia from a historical kingdom into a constituent of a modern state system. The collapse of Austria-Hungary also had immediate social and economic consequences. Industrial production shifted from imperial coordination to national administration, urban centers reorganized municipal governance, and rural areas adjusted to new political oversight. Nationalized institutions replaced imperial bureaucracies, while cultural organizations promoted Czech language, education, and historical awareness. Economic networks, previously integrated with Vienna, required reorientation toward Prague and other regional hubs. Military structures were similarly transformed. Former imperial garrisons and units were reorganized into national defense forces, incorporating both experienced veterans and new recruits. Strategic infrastructure, including railways and fortifications, was adapted for the needs of the emerging state. The continuity of administrative competence, facilitated by prior Habsburg bureaucratic practices, allowed Czechoslovakia to stabilize rapidly despite the upheaval of imperial collapse. Cultural and symbolic elements reinforced political legitimacy. Monuments, historical narratives, and civic ceremonies invoked Bohemian heritage, linking contemporary nationhood with the legacy of the medieval kingdom. Schools, universities, and media emphasized both historical continuity and modern national identity, fostering public recognition of the new state. Civic rituals, such as parades and official proclamations, underscored the transformation of political authority from imperial to national frameworks. By the end of 1918, the dissolution of Austria-Hungary had definitively ended Habsburg authority in Bohemia. Long-standing imperial structures, administrative, fiscal, military, and judicial, were replaced by national institutions aligned with Czechoslovak governance. Bohemia, once the core of a medieval kingdom and later an integral region of the Habsburg monarchy, now functioned as a historical and cultural foundation for a modern European state. The medieval kingdom became a historical legacy. Its institutions, cultural achievements, and political traditions persisted as reference points for governance, education, and national identity, providing continuity amid the transformation from imperial province to sovereign state. Medieval institutions shaped later federal models. The Kingdom of Bohemia's political and constitutional structures exerted enduring influence well beyond the medieval and early modern periods. Central among these was the system of electoral and estate-based governance, established during the Premyslid and Luxembourg periods and codified under the Golden Bull of 1356. The King of Bohemia held one of the 7 elector positions of the Holy Roman Empire, granting the kingdom institutionalized influence over imperial succession. This formal recognition integrated Bohemia into the empire's constitutional hierarchy while preserving a degree of autonomy for local estates, creating a model for balancing regional authority with superregional governance. The Bohemian Diet and local estates exemplified participatory governance mechanisms in the kingdom. Nobles, clergy, and representatives of urban centers held formal rights to convene, legislate on taxation, and approve policies affecting their territories. Historical records, including parliamentary rolls and legal codices, indicate that estate assemblies exercised oversight over military levies, urban regulations, and fiscal contributions. This system of consultation institutionalized local participation while constraining monarchical absolutism, providing a framework that influenced later constitutional thought in Central Europe. Codified privileges, including land tenure, town charters, and legal exemptions, contributed to a durable constitutional culture. Magdeburg law, German municipal regulations adopted in Bohemian towns, standardized legal procedures and codified civic rights. Royal charters maintained urban autonomy and judicial authority, while Habsburg incorporation retained estate-based privileges, ensuring continuity of constitutional norms despite changing dynasties. This blend of local autonomy and centralized oversight demonstrated practical solutions for managing diverse interests within a composite monarchy. Bohemia's electoral role in imperial succession had broader implications for federalism and constitutional development. By participating directly in the selection of the Holy Roman Emperor, the kingdom demonstrated the integration of regional sovereignty into superregional governance. Contemporary chronicles, such as those by Cosmas of Prague and later imperial records, document the formalized procedures, ceremonial obligations, and legal precedents associated with this office. These practices exemplified early mechanisms for reconciling localized authority with empire-wide decision-making, a concept later echoed in federal and confederal systems. Legal codification and administrative practice in Bohemia contributed to the continuity of constitutional principles across centuries. The interaction between royal prerogative, estate privileges, and urban charters created a dynamic system in which negotiation and compromise were institutionalized. Nobles exercised authority in taxation, military organization, and local adjudication, while monarchs retained executive powers. This structural equilibrium facilitated political stability and provided a reference for subsequent constitutional innovations within Central Europe. The kingdom's experience with dynastic and imperial integration illustrated both the opportunities and limits of constitutional autonomy. Under the Luxembourg and Habsburg dynasties, Bohemia retained formal privileges despite increasing centralization. Documents from imperial chancelleries reveal negotiations over taxation, military levies, and legal jurisdiction, demonstrating that constitutional rights were maintained even as executive authority expanded. This historical precedent informed later debates over federal arrangements, minority rights, and local self-governance within multi-ethnic states. Bohemia's constitutional legacy extended into the Habsburg period and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Estate assemblies, municipal councils, and judicial prerogatives preserved mechanisms for local representation. These institutions enabled Czech political leaders to assert cultural, linguistic, and administrative claims, particularly during the 19th century national revival and the push for federal reform. Legal continuity provided both legitimacy and practical infrastructure for negotiating autonomy within a larger political framework. Historical memory reinforced these institutional models. Legal scholars, historians, and civic leaders referenced medieval charters and electoral privileges as foundational to contemporary governance. Manuscripts, codices, and printed treatises preserved knowledge of the kingdom's procedures, rights, and responsibilities, ensuring that constitutional concepts remained influential even after Bohemia's integration into modern states. This collective memory sustained expectations for political participation, rights recognition, and balanced authority. By the early 20th century, Czech political movements leveraged Bohemia's constitutional heritage to justify demands for autonomy and self-determination within Austria-Hungary. Electoral privileges, parliamentary practice, and legal traditions provided historical precedent supporting federal reform proposals, demonstrating the practical utility of medieval institutional experience. Leaders emphasized continuity with historic Bohemian governance to strengthen legitimacy, illustrating the enduring relevance of constitutional memory in shaping modern political identity. The evolution of Bohemian constitutional structures thus exemplifies the interaction between historical precedent and contemporary governance. Electoral rights, estate participation, and codified privileges established patterns of negotiation, compromise, and institutionalized consultation that informed subsequent political thought. The kingdom's experience provided a model for integrating regional authority within larger political frameworks, balancing local autonomy with centralized oversight, and preserving legal continuity across dynastic and imperial transitions. Before we close this documentary, take a moment to engage with the channel. Hit subscribe to follow Nightfall History for daily deep dives into the world's greatest civilizations. Click the bell icon so you never miss an upload, and comment below with your favorite part of Bohemia's story or a historical question you'd like explored next. Your engagement helps us continue bringing meticulously researched, cinematic history to life.